The for loop is great if you know how many times you need to process a loop. And for this example, it wants to go through 10 times. And so because we started here with 1, we can do less than 11, or we could do less than or equal to 10. And that would get it to process the correct number of times. Okay, and basically all it's having them do is enter a number, and then we're adding that number into a total that we set to 0 as a starting value. And that example is counter-controlled repetition. In this example, the user is going to determine the number of times the loop runs. So this is still counter-controlled, but we are allowing the user to have a say in how many times the loop goes. So we're asking them how many items would they like to process. We read that in. Okay, and then we set some values for other variables that we are going to change inside the loop. And then we get into our loop. And now the condition is that the counter I is less than the number of items that they entered. And all we're asking them is to enter the price. We store that, enter the quantity, we store that. And then we take the price times the quantity and add that into a grand total. And it'll go through this loop for the number of items that they wanted to enter. And then we display that grand total back to them. And this example shows you how you can nest programming structures inside each other. So this program has a for loop with an if else nested inside, and the if else has another if else nested inside. And so here we are again asking them, how many, in this case, it's employees, do they want to enter? We read the number in. We have some variables that we are going to be using in our loop that we create ahead of time. And then we have a for loop that is going to process the number of employees that they added. So if the employee is a salaried employee, they need to enter a 1 or a 2 if they are hourly. So we read in the value that they type. And then if it's a 1, we want them to enter the weekly salary, which we read in and put into the pay variable. If it's a 2, that means they are hourly. So we need a little bit more information. So we ask them for their weekly pay rate, read that in. Then we ask them for the hours that they worked, and we read that in. And so here is where we have the nested if else. Because if the hours are greater than 40, we have to calculate overtime. So we calculate the overtime, we add that into their pay. Otherwise, if they didn't work over 40 hours, we just do a straight calculation for their pay. And if they did not enter a valid number, meaning they didn't enter a 1 or a 2, then we display this little message that, hey, you picked a wrong value, and we set their pay to 0. So when we come out of this loop structure, it's going to display what their pay is. And if they pick the wrong number, it will show a 0. And all of these examples, you should be able to copy and paste into Visual Studio and run them.